everyone, this is Elizabeth from Psychology for Geeks. And today I had a really interesting conversation with Michael from Gather Your Strenght Counseling. And we talked all about his experience opening up his own private practice and doing what we call geek therapy or neurotherapy, or just incorporating geek culture into the therapy session. We had a lengthy conversation and we got a chance to geek out. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hi, everyone. Today I am joined by Michael, who has his own sort of geek therapy practice, and I am very excited to talk about it. So I decided to collaborate with him to make this video to talk a little bit about his own experience opening his own private practice and doing geek therapy with it. So hi, welcome to my YouTube channel, I guess.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I guess the first question will be, what is the name of your private practice?
So the name of my practice is Gather Your Strenght Counseling. I'm located here in San Diego, California.
Oh, nice. I used to live in San Diego because that's where my grad program is. So I'm kind of familiar with the area. Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do in your private practice?
Absolutely. So I provide individual, couples, and family therapy. I start with ages 8 and go up from there. And so I incorporate geek therapy and geek culture and geek psychology into the sessions that I facilitate.
Okay, awesome. So that's my favorite kind of therapy to do. And that's kind of why I started this channel, why I started my website and everything. So can you, like, for the people who don't really know what geek therapy or geek psychology is, can you give us a couple of examples of what it is that you do in your practice or in the therapy sessions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will utilize my knowledge or the participants' knowledge of geek culture to help sort of navigate through challenges, to emphasize certain ideas or beliefs, just so it's something that they can relate to, right? I want to utilize a strength that they have, right, in order to help reach their goals and just kind of understand their experience. To give an example, recently that I did was using the Hulk as an example in therapy. And so the individual, had some anger issues, but we also would practice mindfulness, techniques. And so I would reference Avengers: Age of Ultron, where Black Widow would assist the Hulk in calming himself down. And that was a very intense, mindfulness technique, and it was very effective. And so again, utilizing something that is in pop culture, in geek culture, something that the individual would be able to recognize and help and use to relate to their own experiences.
One of the questions or one of the concerns that I've had before from my supervisors who are not as familiar with this type of therapy, and even parents sometimes, was like, yeah, well, that doesn't really sound like therapy. Mm-hmm. Like you're just geeking out, you're just talking about movies, like you're not really doing therapy. Have you ever encountered that kind of argument?
I have, actually. It's been some time, but I have, and I think, trying to put myself in their shoes, I think it just really came from the idea that maybe certain video games or movies and stuff would actually be problematic if individuals were watching it too much or playing games too much. We also had individuals, like you were saying, that just didn't understand how do you utilize geek culture or just geek themes in therapy, right? It doesn't seem to go hand in hand. And I would say that in order for it to understand it, I think we should kind of go back to the basics of, meeting youth and participants of any age where they're at, right? And utilizing their strengths first, right? That's the foundation that we want to start with therapy. right? And if there's something that someone can relate to better have an understanding of their own experiences, no matter what it is, I think that's where we should start. And geek themes and comic books and anime and video games and all that stuff, it is part of a culture. And if it's something that we can utilize in therapy, why not, you know, figure out a way to, if not relate to, then maybe just at the very least understand that culture, right? That's what it means to be culturally competent.
Right. Yes. And that's the one thing I wanted to mention too, was that that's what it was for me. Because like once I became more comfortable with the fact that I was a geek and a nerd, and that was okay. Like I started identifying with that and it just became part of my culture. But then I realized that for a long time, I didn't want to talk about it because there's such a negative stigma placed on, geeks and nerds, and like there's like this stereotype that you're supposed to fit, and I wear glasses, so that's that's part of it. And so I never really wanted to talk about me reading fan fiction or liking comic books or still watching cartoons when I was in high school or college, because that's not what people my age did, or at least didn't talk about it. And then
Yep.
I decided, well, like that's dumb. Even as adults, we can also enjoy things that children enjoy. If it's fun, why not?
Absolutely.
Like there isn't a thing that says that once you reach a certain age, you're not supposed to like cartoons or you're not supposed to have fun. No, it's actually the opposite. You have to continue having fun. And if that means watching cartoons or playing video games or, doing cosplay, then if it makes you happy, that's good. So I wanted to create sort of like a safe space for people to be able to geek out and be okay with it. And that's
Absolutely.
kind of like, what drives me. So I want to hear a little bit more about how you got interested in this type of therapy and then decided to open your own practice
Yeah.
using it.
Well, going off of what you were talking about, other people, especially, as adults, not liking the idea of, quote unquote play or, geek therapy. Um, I first heard about it through superhero therapy through Dr. Janine Scarlett. I was introduced to her writings, and I went to her book signings and her seminars and everything, because she, was, from my perspective, someone who had a doctorate degree and providing therapy and talking about superheroes. So, and I was like, I need to listen to this person who has a title and experience behind her name and understand, how she got to where she is, because if that's true for her, then that could be true for myself and anybody. And just, listening to her and listening to some other individuals, Dr. B, Dr. Megan Connell, Dr. Anthony Bean, I realized that it's okay for me to utilize my strength and help others with this skill in a therapeutic setting. And so once I started using it and feeling comfortable, it just became second nature for me. It's just how my mind thinks now. It just comes automatic. And so last year I decided that I wanted to start my private practice. It's something that I've always thought about for years. Um, I just needed to take that first step, which was a nerve-wracking step. There was definitely some anxiety when it came to it, but I decided to take that first step because I need to start somewhere, and why not advertise, my niche? Why not advertise something that means something dear to me, and that would be geek therapy.
I also started learning about it through Dr. Scarlett. I was one of the very few that was fortunate enough to have her as a professor. And she actually had a class about how to incorporate pop culture. And it was like my favorite. And I would just geek out all the time about it. And after that, I just started learning and looking for more information and trying to reach out, because that's all I knew. I just knew Dr. Scarlett and like my other friends who were also interested in doing that, or sometimes used it in their therapy sessions. And there are actually quite a bit of us. We just happen to be all over the place. We're not like all in the same area, which is why I was so interested in reaching out to you because, well, I know San Diego because I lived there for a little bit, but I didn't know there were like other therapists there other than Dr. Scarlett who were doing this. And little by little, I started like some of the names you mentioned. I was like, oh yeah, they're familiar now because I've been sort of like part of the scene. Now, so how did like you mentioned like you started advertising sort of like your niche? How did when you first opened your private practice, like how did people react to that, to you advertising for Geeks?
I would say the first individuals that I advertised were people that I already knew in my community, right, and wanting to spread the word. And it was easy for me to advertise to them because they knew me as a geek first and therapy second, right? And so it made sense to them for me to provide this in a clinical setting, in a therapeutic setting. And I think once once I started, providing, comparisons to geek therapy and to, just everyday struggles that we all go through, everyday stressors, I think that also helped people within my community to kind of realize, oh, that's how it connects, right? That's where we have that common ground, because yes, I can relate to that. Even if it's a piece of geek therapy that they don't even understand, or geek culture that they don't even understand, just having that connection of like, oh my gosh, yes, I can relate to that. And that's what people are looking for when they're seeking help, is if there's something that they could have common ground on and something that they can relate to. So I started advertising my practice through social media, Instagram and Facebook. And then from there, I created my own website. And through my website and social media and Facebook, I also got connected to Google My Business and Google Search, because that helped with getting the word out as well too. I will admit, advertisement is not my strong suit. Um, Even in high school when we're selling candy for fundraisers, I was never really good at it. But I do my best, and I have people who support me who are much more skilled at it than I am. And so just getting the word out that my practice exists, it definitely is a slow start, especially if you're not already contracted through an insurance. But I encourage anyone who's starting to keep at it, figure out what tricks everyone's using. Consider going on insurance panels and kind of do your own research. Some people are okay with it, some people are not. But I definitely encourage you to stick with it, because now my practice is starting to pick up a little bit of traction. Took a little bit, but now it's starting to. So I highly encourage everyone to do so.
I think it's with anything, right? It takes a while for people to figure out. And one of the things that I sort of realized as well, like now with my website and like my social media accounts, is that it's still relatively new to most people. Like not maybe not to us because we're in it and we're thinking about it all the time. Like earlier you said that it just comes automatic to you now to do like that type of therapy. And then I'm like, oh yeah, because when I'm watching something, like when I go to the movies and I have like a great scene or I hear a quote and I'm like, oh, that's perfect to talk about this, and then I start like geeking out and I'm like, yes, this is good. And I think just me thinking about like the type of therapist that I would like to have, it it really depends, right, on people, on like what they need. Let me ask you something. Do you always do geek therapy or does it depend on the client?
It depends on the client. I always advertise myself as a geek therapist and what that may or may not look like in sessions. But I want to meet the client where they're at. So the first couple of clients that I started working with, they wanted to talk about it. They appreciated me utilizing it in therapy. And then, came across someone who, was looking for a therapist, but not necessarily wanted to focus as much on geek therapy. And that's okay. I do want to, build my practice and have a program that is, very geek therapy centered. but I also, I want to help everybody. you know, I don't want to say, well, you're not a geek, therefore, I can't work with you. No, I want to be able to assist, whoever I can. And you never know, right? Because geek therapy is also very, it's so broad, and I think we focus, on, again, like video games, superheroes, anime, fantasy, stuff like that. But it can be in so many different things. Football, in my opinion, is a very geeked out thing. You go to the games and you wear the jerseys, right? And our equivalent, that is, to me, that is a form of cosplay, because you're
Right.
wearing someone else's jersey. You know all the stats of all the players on the team, and their history and everything. Some of us will spend a lot of time just reviewing stats of our Dungeons and Dragons character or Pokemon, trying to, figure out the best way to succeed. And so, you'd be surprised what you can incorporate as far as like geek culture.
Right. Yes. Yes, I love that you mentioned that because I also talk about that too, like especially with my friends, because not all my friends identify as geeks.
Hmm.
And then so when I talk about it and they're like, oh yeah, I don't really understand. I'm like, well, but you like, collecting Starbucks cups, or you like reading. That's still like that makes you have something to geek out. If there is an activity that you're very passionate about, then you can geek out with it, and then you can bring it into the therapy session. I always tell people that it's just um it makes it a bit easier because it's kind of like our comfort zone, right? Like movies and anime and all that, that's my comfort zone. So if you start talking about it in therapy, then it makes it a lot easier for me to understand and to feel comfortable in the session than to discuss my trauma or my past or whatever, because therapy is difficult. As much as I advertise that it can be fun and interesting, it can also be a very difficult process, you know?
Right. I think also the fear that a lot of mental health providers have is, well, what if I don't know their specific geek fandom, right? What if I don't understand it? And that's okay, right? That's okay. It is not required for you to have an understanding. I know quite a few things. I don't know everything when it comes to, geek psychology and geek culture. I do not know everything by a long shot, but I allow the participant to teach me, and through teaching me, I gain an understanding of their perspective on not just that particular piece of the culture, but on themselves as well, their viewpoint on, a particular character or a particular scene. And I utilize their perspective as a tool in the therapeutic setting.
Right, because it's the client is the expert in their own life, right? And then so it's kind that's how I see it. Like it's kind of like that. Even if I don't understand, the movie or whatever it is that, the area of fandom that I'm not familiar with, if they're able to make that connection and understand it and sort of like talk about it and explain it, then that's great. That's kind of what we're there for, right? To help them make those connections and, understand it in a slightly different way. And if that helps them, then great. We don't have to understand how it came about as
Yeah,
long as they do, right? Yeah.
absolutely. Meeting them where they're at. That's what we're doing.
So earlier you were sort of encouraging people to just keep at it if that's something they were passionate about, to do to incorporate pop culture into the therapy session. As you were sort of starting your own practice and getting familiar with everything, what was the best advice that you were given?
I would say the best advice that I was given was advice I didn't want to take, um, which was considering joining an insurance panel. Um, I think, and I know that there's a lot of individuals that are just 100% against insurance because of submitting claims, because things maybe get rejected and it may take a little while for, payment to go through and stuff like that, which are all valid, by the way. Um, I always like to be challenged and learn about different things, and just kind of learning how to navigate that. I'm still learning how to navigate it, is something that I think will be helpful in the long run. So I to kind of answer the question, the advice that was given is to not be so closed off to certain pieces of building a private practice, right? Do your research, talk to people who've, you know, done, things a particular way, or done things differently than you have. In my, example, as far as insurance, I'm talking to people who have been on many insurance panels, and some who are just like, I absolutely do not want to do it. And just because I want to keep an open mind, because I don't know what's going to work for me. um, and I also want to be able to reach out to as many people as possible. um, and so, again, do your research. I've looked at a lot of YouTube videos, from many different sources. And so I encourage you, in all aspects of building a private practice, do your research, speak to people who have done this before, and just be open-minded, because you never know what's going to happen in the future.
And I think part of what happens too, like a few years ago when I was doing my internship, one of the trainings that we had was about, I honestly can't remember. But the one thing that I do remember is that they were talking about social media and how, it kind of has been, psychology or just mental health in general has this kind of dislike for social media in general, and like the way we are portrayed in social media, or like just in the media in general, it's
Mhm.
not always the best or the most accurate way, right?
No.
So like that just increases, the stigma that's placed on, going to therapy and therapist. um but I had a different perspective. Maybe it was because I kind of grew up with it, or just because it was actually very helpful for me. But and you mentioned you advertise on social media, and there's a lot of therapists out there who are like, no, don't be on social media. And that's what we hear. Like in the classroom, almost every single professor that I had was, or even most supervisors were like, just don't have social media, don't have any accounts, don't interact, don't do anything online. And I'm like, why? And I'm like, well, at first I was like resistant to it because, well, how do I communicate with my friends and family? Like that's how I use social media to do that. And then after a while I was like, wait, but how are we supposed to eliminate, like, it's just as a profession, how are we supposed to eliminate that, like, that stigma that's placed on like mental health and therapy, and like that misinformation that's out there, if we're not out there
Mhm.
also saying, providing helpful information? So I really do not like the fact that in a lot of, I don't know what your graduate program was like, but for mine there wasn't um a class that will tell you about like how to do your own private practice, or like the business side of things, or like how to advertise, like all of those things. Like they were just kind of like, all right, good luck, you know how to do therapy, go out there and work. And we're like, what? No, there's tons of things that we still don't know. And like even just having one class on like the bare basics on what you need will be like so helpful. um and because we didn't have that, I was wondering if you could share some of like the things that you've learned along the way when you open your own private practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I can also start by saying, as far as the social media piece, I think I heard both sides of the coin. Yes, you should do it. No, you shouldn't. My reasoning for doing it was, I thought it was a good way to reach out, especially during the pandemic, where I couldn't, walk around and go to different networking events and hand individuals my card. I thought that was a good way to, reach out. And, that's how, you and I got acquainted through
Yes.
social media. And so it does work. And it's also, kind of going back to the theme of geek therapy, it's a platform that's there, and it works, and a lot of people utilize it. Geek therapy is very, very present, and it's more present now, in my opinion, than it has ever before. And so if it's there, I think you should utilize it. If it's a tool, definitely do so. As far as getting started, um, again, a lot of research, a lot of research, a lot of reading articles, a lot of going on YouTube about how to start private practice. Private practice skills on YouTube was helpful. Abundance practice building was helpful, and so many different other platforms that I was able to utilize. Um, I first had to make sure I understood the different types of businesses that I could apply for through the state, right? Making sure you get in excuse me, saying it incorrectly, EIN number, which is employment identification number. It's kind of like a social security number for your business. Going through that is something that you can easily apply for. Um, you know, Learning differences between doing S corp and being a sole proprietor, and just the different tax pros and cons of all those things. So it took a while, and I had to sit down with friends who were learning with me. um, and then getting a business license and getting all that put together. um, there's definitely a lot of steps, but I encourage you. I would say some advice that I would give is, again, talk, if you know people who have done this before, talk to multiple people, because everyone has a different experience and what's worked with them. I highly recommend connecting with a tax consultant who has done this before and helped people start businesses, especially if you can find one who has assisted therapist. That would be really helpful too. They're out there. Like you just got to find them. You just got to look for them. That was one thing I wish I would have done beforehand, which is sat down with a tax consultant before I started anything. Heard from their experience, because my experience would have probably been a lot smoother, a lot quicker. But it's okay. I got where I am, and it was a learning experience.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I would like to do in the future. I would like to open my own private practice, and a lot of the terms you were mentioning, I was like, yes, I am still confused by that. But yeah, there's a lot of things out there. And one of the things, I think one of the YouTube videos that I looked at that talked about private practice was, don't be afraid to reach out, like you were saying, like to reach out to other people, and to like, if you don't have to be an expert in accounting, on law, or anything like that. You can always reach out to a lawyer or to like a tax expert, like you were mentioning. Like, you don't have to do everything on your own. And I think that's something really important for us to understand, especially because newly graduated, or like the first few years, there's still that that little voice inside our head where we're like, oh, we're not good enough, or I'm still not an expert, I still don't know what I'm doing, I don't know what's going on, so, but and that's okay. And I think the other thing I wanted to mention too, that it just kind of came up as we were talking, was that you have to find your own comfort zone, right? So you were really comfortable, and like, you identified as a geek, so that's why you open this, this type of therapy, or like you do this type of therapy, and you open your own private practice, and that's how you advertise it. But if there's people out there who don't feel comfortable with social media and do not want to use it, they don't have to. Like, you just have to find your own comfort level, right? I think going to, like, through the grad program, sometimes we have this idea of like, oh, we have to do what our professors did or what they say. But if that doesn't work for you, then you don't have to do that. You can find your own way. And there's tons of different therapists out there, right? And talking about tons of different therapists out there, what are some of the things that you geek about? Like, what are some of the things that you like to bring into the session, or like some of the fandoms that you like?
Absolutely. So anything superhero related, I really enjoy. My first experience of anything geek was the old 90s Spider-Man cartoon, and Super Friends. That's where I started my love for geek culture.
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek, I'm a big fan of. Lord of the Rings, anything fantasy, I'm a big fan of. Dungeons and Dragons, I love Dungeons and Dragons. I love playing with it with my friends, my family. I love it so much. Um, I am not as well versed in anime as I used to be. Um, but again, I don't mind hearing it from anyone who's more caught up with anime in that part of the culture. More recently. Um, let's see, what other fandoms? There's so many. Harry Potter, Avatar, The Last Airbender. Just there's just so much that I'm just blanking out right now. But it's a part of me. It is I got a section in my home that's just dedicated to nerd and geek culture. I was encouraged by Dr. Megan Connell. I wanted to decorate my office with geek culture, right? With different portraits and memorabilia. I wanted to decorate it, and I was hesitant because I was like, what if someone goes in there and they don't take me seriously, right? And one of the things that she told me, which, and it's something I'll never forget, is, this is who you are, and don't be ashamed of who you are. This is what you love. If they're coming to see you, then show them who you are. And if I'm not for somebody, then that's okay, right? That's okay. And as soon as I had that conversation with her, I started putting up, the Justice League on one wall. I have BB-8 from Star Wars on another wall. Captain Marvel, on another part of my wall. It's just like I just started decorating as much as I could because, she was right. This is who I am, and this is my way of helping others.
Right. And I think just being on the other, like, I guess on both sides of the therapy couch, I think what's really important is that connection that you're able to have with the therapist or with the client, right? And have sometimes your decorations help a lot. Like I don't have it up here, but I have a Avengers clock that I had in my previous office, and I think I had a Groot little miniature or something on my desk. And I had a client who came in, and we were doing the intake, just going through it. And he was kind of young, and it was his first experience, and he was kind of hesitant, and so was the parent. And then they saw and they were like, oh, you like that? And I was like, yeah. And then we started talking about it and how much he liked it, and how the new movies were coming out or whatever. And then there was that instant connection, right? Just because I had something on my wall, that he could identify or he liked as well. And it just made everything go a lot smoother after that, because then he felt more comfortable because he knew a little bit about who I was.
Absolutely.
After that, or the things that I liked.
It really makes a difference. The first art piece that I had that my colleagues always make fun of, it was a painting of a horse. And it was, it was a nice painting, wasn't, a big masterpiece, but it was nice. But one thing, that the reason why they were making fun of me for it was because they kept saying, this isn't you, right?
Oh.
It doesn't represent you. And as soon as I switched it out for my other things, it just felt more welcoming for myself, because geek culture, that's who I am. It is a huge part of my life. And they stopped making fun of me, which is weird, right? Because typically we're used to the opposite, right? Where we have that stuff, are showing our geek side, then we have a history of just being criticized for that. But my friends didn't. They're like, this is who you are, keep it up, don't change it.
Right. And I talked about, like, I wanted to create a safe space for people to feel comfortable, and that's what therapy is for a lot of people, a safe space for them to talk about and process whatever is going on in their life at that moment. But I think it also needs to be a safe space for the therapist. Like, you have to feel comfortable in that office, because if you because of, like, all my practicums and stuff, there were times where we're just kind of like in this utility closet sometimes, for some privacy, or like we had to share offices, and I was kind of like afraid to touch anything because it was in my office. So I didn't feel comfortable. And I think, like, the clients notice that if you're not comfortable in your own office, or you don't feel like it's a safe space for you, then it's not going to be for the other person, who's, so yeah. So I think, yeah, I just love it so much.
Yeah. This is what we do. And again, the goal is to help the person that's sitting across from us. And if we can find something that we can both relate to, even if it's something small, then we can utilize that to help that individual to see an aspect of their life in a different viewpoint that maybe they didn't do so before. And so whatever that is, for you, whatever your niche would be, whatever your strength is, utilize that strength. And if geek culture is your strength, then go for it. Don't hide it. It is who you are, and it is okay.
Right. Yeah, there I think part of the hesitance sometimes is because we were drilled, like it was drilled into our head that like you're supposed to kind
Mhm.
of be like a blank slate. You're not supposed to react in any way. You're not supposed to do anything. And I'm like, but we're human as well. So if we are empathetic or empathic, we're empathic to the other person, and we feel for them. If we cry or we feel sad for them, that's okay. Like we need to show that that we understand what they're experiencing, and we're not just like a blank slide they can talk to. We are people too, and we also make mistakes, right? Acknowledging that we make mistakes, I think it's one of the things that we fear the most. I think maybe as when we're first starting as therapists, because we're like, oh, we're supposed to be the expert, we're supposed to know all of these things, and no, we no, that's not. We're just human, just like everyone else.
We are.
We have things that we like, things we don't understand. We've made mistakes. Sometimes we don't have our life fully put together, like like it might look like, and that's okay. Like we're just, I think all of that just helps us to understand better, the situation, where other people are coming from and stuff. So if somebody would to be interested in checking out your website or social media, where would they go
Yeah,
find it?
absolutely. So on Instagram and Facebook is Gather Your Strenght Counseling. You can go ahead and find me on there. My website is gyscounseling.com for Gather Your Strenght. And if anyone has any questions about private practice, I'll be the first to tell you that I am not an expert. I can share you my experiences and point you in the right direction of some of the resources that I used to get started. But I think that's something that that those who have had the experience, veteran, therapists, because like you're mentioning, there is no class for starting a private practice. So I encourage anyone with any level of experience, to, be ready for someone to ask, like, hey, what was your experience like? I would like to learn. Because I think we got to help each other and teach each other.
I think so too. I think that's why I sort of also began my Reframing Re-Enchant series, which we have collaborated for before, because
Yeah.
I want, even though I want to help everyone, I can't. I don't have the expertise. Maybe I'm not a good fit for that person. And I only have so many hours, that I can schedule people in. So I think the more we can help each other advertise or connect or start their own private practice, I think the better
Mhm.
off, because then that means there's more of us and more people can reach out and get the help that they need. So that's good. So I will also put all that information on the description for people to make it a lot easier.
Thank you.
um yeah, so before we end, do you have I had asked you before, I don't know if you had something prepared, but do you have a success story you could talk about?
A success story.
Mm.
Um, I would say the success story was the first client that I had for private practice, because it was the first time that I met with somebody without like another program or a county program behind me. And even though I've done so many different intakes with so many different people, this one was different, right? Because it was me. It was just me, and using my skills to uh, help support this individual. And so the first time just sitting there and introducing him to geek therapy and letting him know what to expect for therapy, um, and doing my own intake process and all that, it was just, for me, it was just invigorating, because it took steps, a lot of steps, to start the practice and have that first sit down with somebody. And it was just so gratifying, because that was the first step, and I knew what to do afterwards, right, with anyone else that came my way. And I was like, I just need to get over that one hurdle, that one, like, anxious feeling. And it went fine, and it went great. There was also this, to kind of look at the other piece and just to be transparent, there's also that success of, you know, getting paid for the first time. it
Right.
is it is different than, you working at a program or a county program and getting that paycheck, right? Because it is something that you set for your scale, and it is based off of 100% the work that you put into that individual. And so it was just a full circle for me, that yes, I started my practice, yes, I got paid for the service that I helped build, and using all the expertise that I've learned, from my own experience and from others. It was just a very flattering and surreal feeling. And so I have to say, as I hope it doesn't sound too cheesy, but the first client that I had was my success story, because I started my business.
Well, and that was the signal that it it is possible. The things that you worked so hard for, it is possible. And having that one client, I can imagine that it feels like, yes, I can do this. I know how to do this. This is
Yeah,
this is what I want to do. Yeah, so that's awesome. Thank you so much for doing this with me again. So um
absolutely.
I, like I said, I will have all the description, like all that information, how people can contact you and reach out to you, in the description of the video. And if they have any questions, they can, I guess, comment on it, or they can reach out to you through social media or your website. uh, so yeah, and I hope you guys learned a little bit like I did. I learned tons, and I am more encouraged than ever, I think, to continue um, doing this, because it's what I'm passionate about. It's who I am, and I think it can be very helpful for people as well.
There you go. Thank you for having me.
Well, I really like that. So I hope you guys find a lot of like really helpful information if you're thinking of opening your own private practice. I know for sure I did. I learned a lot. And which is why I wanted to make a handful of these. I have another video like this interviewing another person who has their own private practice. So I'll be posting that next month. So don't forget to subscribe so you can be the first to know when I post a video.